everyone, ZeBirdBrain here. Today I'm going to show you how to composite a shadow. So I have a drop shadow here that I made last video. So I'm going to show you a couple little tricks on how to composite that shadow. Alright, so I'm going to stay in my render view. If you don't know how to get the result of the shadow, I strongly encourage you to check my other video that I did last week. Because this week we're just focusing on actually compositing the shadow. Alright, so let's get started. What I have here is a regular shadow node, but we're going to learn multiple ways to push it further. So instead of using a shadow node, what I'm going to use now is something that would be more close to what you would get on Photoshop, for example, or Clip Studio Paint, or any of your painting software. So I'm going to get a matte blur. The matte blur is any compositing artist's best friend. I'm going to press Alt to put it here. And what the matte blur does is it just gives a color to your drawing. Oh, and by the way, the shadow needs to be behind the character, right? So yeah, pretty important. And now with the matte blur, I'll be able to give it any color that I want. Like that. So I'm gonna go for not a pure black, but I'm gonna go for like a dark blue. I will not edit the alpha, and that is more of a practical thing because you can adjust the alpha here to get a transparency in your color. But I always think it's more easy to actually have a transparency node. And that is because, especially if you're working in a team project, it's just easier for any compositing artist to understand your thought process. Instead of having to dig inside the matte blur and kind of see if you change the alpha, you can just go to transparency. And like if they see a transparency node, like they'll know that you adjusted the transparency. So it's always just more practical to have these layered out like that. Now I'm gonna need a little more room, so I'm gonna pull these down like this. Now I have my matte blur, and the matte blur is great because it works like the highlight, like the tone, shadow, and glow. It's always the same layout, so you can adjust the radius of the blur. Or you can also deal with the blur with another external node, which is something I'm going to show you in a moment. You can play with the color here, so it's the same as what we've seen before, so I won't spend too much time on it. By the way, you can invert it, and sometimes it's pretty cool. And now, the transparency node, it's important to note that if it's 0, it's actually 0% visible, so it's like 100% opaque. And if you set your transparency to 100%, it's actually not visible because it will be 100% transparent. I know for some people it's counterintuitive, but I always thought it was intuitive, but I'm saying this in case. Did I set my shadow to 60%? Yeah, that makes sense. And then I'm gonna blend it on my background. So I'm gonna add a blending node. Blending. The blending node is super easy to use. It's basically what you would find in any painting software. It is a blend mode. The SWF blend mode is just for flash export, so like you don't have to care about it. So you just have to use the blend mode here. Now there are a lot of blending modes, so I strongly recommend checking the documentation to understand all of them. I'm just gonna go to a classic multiply. So that will be a pretty basic yet very efficient system for your shadow. If you feel fancy, you can also add a blur. I'm gonna talk about the blurs in another video, but you know, I would go maybe for a blur box or a blur radial because they're not that slow to render. And then you could just blur out your shadow if you want. Or you can use the blur from the matte blur. This is acceptable. Right, and of course, all of these parameters that have a little curve like that, you can animate them in your timeline. Super easy. All you have to do is click on your node, go to your timeline, press on O to locate it here. And then you can just animate this parameter with a keyframe, just like you would with anything else. Okay, I'm not gonna add a blur just because it's longer to render. So yeah, so that is one way to composite your shadow. Another way to do it that I enjoy is also to use a gradient to cut your shadow. So I'm gonna show you how to do that. We're gonna need a gradient node. And that gradient, I'm gonna set it to be white, like this. And the other end will be transparent. This is what I would get. I'm gonna use the show control button to see my gradients control. And what I'm gonna do is just do something like this. Of course, if you're not lazy like I am, you could also just draw a gradient on a drawing layer. But I'm in a hurry today, so just gonna use a good old gradient. Just make sure you use a visibility node to hide it from your OpenGL view and only see it into your render view, because otherwise it's gonna be a hell to navigate your OpenGL view. And then I'm just going to connect that to a cutter. Like this. I'm gonna do this. And then I'm just going to take my gradient and connect it to my cutter. And you see, oops, I actually need to invert it. There you go. And this could make your shadow fade out into the emptiness. And you know, if I can use that for a cutter, you can also use it for a blur variable. So I'm just going to exchange the cutter for a blur variable. Like this. And instead, it's going to gradually make your shadow blurry. So I never know which one I have to use, so like, I'm gonna go by luck. Oh, I had the right one. So I'm gonna go to the white radius. And so as it goes away, it's just gonna get more and more blurry. And this is clean, and this gets blurry. And this is all because of your gradient. And the gradient is animatable, by the way. This is why usually I use a gradient instead of a drawing. It just depends on what I need. Yeah, so that is how you could composite a shadow. I hope you had fun, and that you're gonna have fun compositing your shadows. Have a nice day!